She had been preparing for this moment for months from the day she received her invitation to the prestigious event. She could barely believe she had been selected to attend. Every detail of her appearance was planned down to the finest accessory. Each step of her outfit was calculated to show the world that she belonged in this space. Despite the odds stacked against her, the hours spent rehearsing her pitch, practicing her handshake, and memorizing the names of key people she had to meet seemed like the perfect preparation for this night. She was ready, but nothing could have prepared her for what happened when she reached the entrance to the event. The venue was grand and shimmering with lights that danced off the walls, and the air smelled of luxury and opportunity. She could already hear the hum of conversation and the sound of glasses clinking together. As she approached the door, her heart raced, her palms slightly sweaty, not from nerves, but from the weight of expectation that pressed down on her. She was ready for the moment, but then came the words she didn't expect to hear. The bouncer at the door looked her up and down, his eyes lingering just a moment too long on her attire, and then he shook his head with a smirk on his lips. Without a word, he motioned for her to step aside. She was confused at first. Surely there had been some mistake. She was on the guest list. She could feel her breath catch as he spoke again in a dismissive tone. Not quite meeting her eyes, he told her she couldn't enter the VIP section. It was for people like her, he said, and she needed to wait in the back, where the others like her would be waiting too. Her mind raced. She had to be hearing this wrong. She was a successful professional, a woman who had clawed her way to the top from nothing, had worked too hard to be turned away. Now the disbelief hit her hard like a punch to the stomach. The humiliation burned in her chest, but she tried to remain calm. She smiled politely and nodded, pretending to understand, pretending to accept his words. But inside she was seething. The injustice, the unfairness, the simple act of being judged because of how she looked and not who she was something she had known all too well, but it never hurt like this before. She watched as other guests walked past her, with ease slipping through the velvet ropes into the space. She had dreamed of joining those who wore fancy clothes and strutted around like they owned the world. They didn't even notice her standing there, as if she were invisible, just another person who didn't fit the mold they had set for what success looked like. She felt a sharp sting in her heart, but quickly suppressed it, turning away and walking to the back of the line where she was forced to stand. The evening stretched on, and she watched from the sidelines as others networked and made deals, all while she stood waiting, hoping for a chance to prove herself. But she knew deep down it wasn't going to come, at least not that night. No matter how much she wanted to push forward and make them see her, she knew she was invisible here, and for the first time in a long time it stung in a way that made her question everything she had worked for. But as the night went on, the humiliation began to shift into something else. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't defeat. It was a fire that began to burn deep within her, a fire that told her this wasn't the end. This wasn't how her story was going to end. She would make sure of it. She would come back stronger, smarter, more powerful than they could ever imagine. And they would know her name. They would understand who she was and what she was capable of. But for now, she would let the fire burn quietly within her. She would let it grow and fuel her every move as she left the event that night, not defeated but determined more than ever to show the world what they had missed out on. As she walked away from the event, the sting of rejection was still fresh, but something inside her shifted. A sense of determination began to rise in her heart. She didn't know exactly what her next steps would be, but she knew one thing for sure: this moment would not define her. She wouldn't let it. She would not allow a single person or event to dictate her worth. She could feel the weight of her dreams pressing down on her, the promises she had made to herself to prove to the world that she was meant for so much more. She spent the next few days thinking about what had happened, replaying every detail in her mind, analyzing what went wrong. But instead of allowing herself to drown in the feelings of inadequacy, she had learned to channel her anger into something constructive. She turned her attention back to work, back to the things that had gotten her to this point. In the first place, hard work, ambition, and perseverance. It was what she had used to climb the ladder of success before, and it was what she would use again, only this time she would push even harder. She wasn't going to wait for anyone's permission to succeed. She would take what was rightfully hers, and no one could stop her. In the months that followed, she threw herself into her career like never before. Every project was an opportunity to prove herself. Every challenge was something to overcome. She made connections, built her network, and pushed forward even when the odds seemed stacked against her. She didn't stop. She couldn't stop, because the moment she allowed herself to relax, the moment she allowed her mind to drift to the past, would be the moment she lost everything she had worked for. With each passing day, she grew stronger, smarter, more confident. She took on leadership roles in her industry and stood out among her peers. She was no longer the woman standing on the sidelines waiting to be noticed. She was the one leading the charge, making her presence felt in every room she entered. She worked harder than anyone else. Every move was calculated, every decision intentional. She became someone people noticed, someone people respected, and the whispers in the room began to change from skepticism to admiration. But even as she achieved success, she never forgot the lesson that had been burned into her memory that night at the event. She didn't forget what it felt like to be dismissed, to be treated as though she didn't belong, to be made invisible simply because of her appearance. She kept that feeling close to her heart, not as a wound, but as a source of power. It fueled her every decision, every business deal, every challenge she faced became an opportunity to show the world that she wasn't just good enough, she was more than enough. Her name began to spread across the industry, and soon she became known for her work, her leadership, and her ability to get things done. But more than that, she became known for her resilience. She was the woman who had been overlooked and rejected, and yet had risen to the top despite the odds stacked against her. She had become a symbol of strength for others who had faced the same challenges and were told they didn't belong. And then came the call that would change everything, the offer. She had been waiting for an opportunity to take the reins of a company, one that had been struggling to find its way, a company that needed someone with vision, someone with drive, and someone who understood the true meaning of overcoming adversity. She didn't hesitate. She accepted the position and immediately began putting her plans into action. She knew that this was her moment, her chance to show the world who she had become and what she could do with the power to create real change. As she settled into her new role as CEO, she knew that she wasn't just there to lead the company. She was there to change the game. She would make sure that no one else would ever have to feel the way she had felt that night at the event, rejected, dismissed, overlooked. She would create an environment where people were valued for their abilities, their potential, not their appearance or their background. She would show everyone what true leadership looked like, and she would do it on her own terms, with strength, dignity, and a vision for a future that was inclusive of all people. As the weeks passed after accepting the CEO position, she began to settle into her role with a sense of quiet determination. She knew that this was more than just a career opportunity. This was a chance to reshape the way people viewed leadership and success from the inside out. She spent countless hours studying the company's inner workings, assessing what needed to be fixed and what needed to be enhanced. She wasn't just making decisions for herself anymore. She was making them for a whole team of people whose futures rested on her shoulders. Every meeting she attended was an opportunity to make her presence known, to assert herself as a leader who had earned her place in the room. She was no longer the woman left waiting in the shadows outside the VIP section. She was the one calling the shots, the one steering the ship toward success and growth. And with each decision she made, with each challenge she overcame, the company began to thrive under her leadership. She pushed her team to work harder, smarter, and more collaboratively than ever before. No one was allowed to slack off. No one was allowed to rest on their laurels. Everyone was expected to bring their A game every single day. But she didn't just push her team to do their best. She also made sure to lead by example. She knew that true leadership wasn't about demanding respect from others. It was about earning it through hard work, integrity, and a willingness to do the hard things that others might shy away from. She rolled up her sleeves and got involved in every aspect of the business. From meeting with clients to reviewing financial reports to giving presentations, she was everywhere, and she was doing everything with a level of grace and professionalism that left no room for doubt about her capabilities. Soon the company began to see results. The financials improved, employee morale went up, and clients began to notice the change. They could feel it in the way they were treated, the way their needs were prioritized, the way the company seemed to always be one step ahead of the competition. It was clear that her leadership was paying off in ways no one had expected, and the once struggling company was now a powerhouse in the industry. But for her, the real victory wasn't in the numbers or the accolades, it was in the way her vision had started to take shape. She had always dreamed of a workplace where people felt valued and respected no matter their background or appearance. She had always wanted to create an environment where talent and potential were the only things that mattered, and now she was doing it. Every decision she made was with that vision in mind. She would not let anyone else be left out or made to feel less than because of who they were or where they came from. She was building something different, something that could last beyond the bottom line. And yet, as she stood in front of her team giving one of her many speeches about the importance of inclusion and respect, she couldn't help but think back to that night all those months ago, when she had been rejected at the VIP entrance to an event, when she had been told that she didn't belong in the same space as the people who walked past her. Without a second thought, the memory was still vivid in her mind. But now it was different. It wasn't a painful memory anymore. It was a reminder of why she was here, why she had worked so hard, and why she would never stop fighting for herself and others. One evening, as she walked into the office late to catch up on some work, she saw a group of employees gathered around chatting and laughing together. The energy in the room was light and positive. They didn't know it, but they were all part of the change she had worked so hard to create. And in that moment, she realized that she had achieved what she had set out to do. She had created a company where everyone felt seen and valued. No one was overlooked, and no one was dismissed based on their appearance or background. She had built a place where talent was what mattered most, and she was proud of what they had all achieved together. As the months turned into a year, she began to realize that this transformation wasn't just about the company's success. It was about something much larger than herself. She had created a ripple effect within the walls of her company that reached far beyond the boardroom. She saw people of all backgrounds stepping into leadership roles. People who had once been overlooked and dismissed now had the chance to prove themselves, and they were thriving. The culture was shifting, and the results were undeniable. One afternoon, she was in a meeting with her senior leadership team discussing the next big move for the company, when one of her colleagues spoke up. She was a woman of color, someone who had once been passed over for promotions in favor of others who didn't bring the same experience or vision, but who fit the mold better. She spoke up nervously at first, but as she found her voice, she shared how much the changes in the company had impacted her. She shared how her newfound confidence and opportunity had changed the trajectory of her career, how she now felt seen, heard, and valued in a way she never had before, and how that had translated into her own work ethic and success. Listening to her was a powerful moment for the CEO. It was proof that the vision she had worked so hard to create was not just a lofty idea. It was a reality. She had changed lives, not just her own, but the lives of the people around her, people who had struggled with the same feelings of being ignored or dismissed, who had questioned their worth in a world that often told them they didn't belong. And now here they were thriving, making an impact of their own. She was filled with pride as she realized that this was what leadership was about. It wasn't about achieving personal success or being the best in the room. It was about creating opportunities for others to rise and succeed alongside you. It was about lifting people up and making them believe in their own worth. It was about building a company, a culture, a world where people weren't judged by the color of their skin, their gender, or their background, but by their abilities and potential. The feeling of success wasn't something she took lightly. She knew the road to get here had been long and filled with challenges, but she also knew that it was worth every step she had taken, every struggle she had endured, and every moment of doubt she had faced. She had created something that would last far beyond her time as CEO, something that would continue to change the lives of everyone who walked through the doors of her company. She had set a new standard for what true leadership looked like, one that prioritized integrity, inclusivity, and a deep belief in the power of human potential. And then came the invitation to speak at an international leadership conference. It was one of the most prestigious events in the business world, and when she received the invite, she couldn't help but smile. She knew this moment was coming, but it still felt surreal. It was a full-circle moment, one she had never dreamed of, but one she had worked for tirelessly every day since that night, when she had been turned away from the VIP section of the event. As she prepared for her speech, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the people who had rejected her, and the lessons she had learned from that experience. The pain had turned into fuel for her fire, and now she stood at the forefront of change, not just in her own company, but in the broader business world. She would speak not just about success, but about the importance of creating spaces where everyone could thrive, where people could be seen and heard for who they truly were, and where potential wasn't limited by preconceived notions or biases. When the day of the conference arrived, she stood on stage in front of hundreds of industry leaders and professionals with a calm confidence that came from years of proving herself to the world. She spoke passionately about leadership transformation and the power of inclusion, and as she shared her story with the audience, she saw the faces of those in the crowd, nodding in agreement, feeling the impact of her words, just as she had once felt the impact of that rejection. All those months ago, the moment she had been turned away at the door had led her to this place, and she knew she had truly come full circle. As she wrapped up her speech at the conference, she felt a sense of fulfillment that was hard to put into words. It wasn't about the applause or the recognition, it was about the impact she knew her story had on those in the audience. She could see it in their faces, the nods of agreement, the silent promises to themselves to do better, to change their approach to leadership, to create spaces where others could thrive just as she had done in her company. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, but even more for the journey she knew was still ahead. Later that evening, as the conference wrapped up, she was surrounded by leaders and professionals eager to speak with her, to thank her for sharing her story and for inspiring them. Some of them shared their own stories of rejection, their own struggles with being overlooked or underestimated. It was clear that her experience resonated with so many people who had faced similar challenges throughout their careers. They shared how her words had given them the courage to keep going, to push past the barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. And as they spoke to her, she couldn't help but think back to the moment when she had been rejected at the VIP entrance so many months ago. In that moment, she had felt so small, so invisible. But now, as she stood surrounded by people who saw her for who she truly was, she realized that the pain she had experienced was nothing compared to the power of what she had become. As she made her way through the crowd, one particular conversation stood out. It was with a young woman just starting her career in the business world. She was nervous and unsure of herself, but there was a fire in her eyes that the CEO recognized immediately. The young woman spoke about how she had been told time and time again that she wasn't ready for leadership roles, that she needed more experience, that she didn't fit the mold of what a leader was supposed to look like. The CEO smiled and gently placed a hand on her shoulder, telling her that leadership wasn't about fitting a mold, it was about breaking it and creating something new, that it was about being bold and authentic and never letting anyone else define her worth. She could see the young woman's eyes light up with newfound confidence, and in that moment she knew that she had made a difference, not just in her own life, but in the lives of others who were now inspired to take charge of their own futures. As the event came to a close, and she walked out into the cool night air, she took a deep breath and reflected on everything. She had accomplished everything. She had overcome the rejection, the struggles, the doubt she had faced along the way. And yet here she was, the CEO of a thriving company, a respected leader in her industry, and someone who had built a legacy of inclusion, respect, and empowerment. She thought about the countless people she had met along the way, those who had inspired her and those who had pushed her to become the person she was today. And she knew that the journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. There was still work to be done. She had seen firsthand how much more needed to be done in the business world to create truly inclusive spaces where everyone had an equal opportunity to succeed. She knew that her story was just one example of the power of resilience and determination, but it was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something even greater. She was determined to continue breaking down barriers, challenging the status quo, and paving the way for the next generation of leaders who would one day stand on the same stage and share their stories with the world just as she had done. With each step she took forward, she knew that her journey was far from over. The lessons she had learned, the challenges she had faced, had only fueled her desire to do more, to inspire more, and to continue showing the world that anything was possible if you had the courage to keep going, no matter the obstacles that stood in your way. As the days passed after the conference, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing inside of her. She had spent so much of her career focused on proving herself to the world that she hadn't fully realized the depth of her own transformation. Until now, she wasn't just leading a company anymore. She was leading a movement. She had become a symbol of what it meant to rise above adversity, to challenge the norms, and to create space for others to succeed. And as she thought about it more, she knew that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than herself. Her company was thriving, and her message of inclusion and empowerment was resonating far beyond the walls of the office. But she realized that if she truly wanted to make a lasting impact, she couldn't stop here. There was so much more to be done, so many more barriers to break down, and so many more people to inspire. She began to think about how she could extend her influence beyond just her company, how she could help shape the future of leadership across industries. She knew that real change came from collaboration and creating networks of like-minded individuals who were all working toward the same goal of creating a more inclusive world. One afternoon, as she sat in her office reviewing proposals and financial reports, her mind wandered back to that night when she had been turned away from the VIP entrance to the event. She thought about how that moment had shaken her, how it had driven her to push harder to prove herself. But now, looking back, she saw it differently. She realized that the rejection had been a gift. It had sparked something in her that nothing else could have. She had turned pain into purpose, and it had propelled her forward in ways she never could have imagined. It was then that the idea came to her. She decided that it was time to launch a new initiative, one that would provide mentorship and resources to people from all backgrounds who were looking to advance their careers in leadership roles. She wanted to create a platform where people who had been overlooked or underestimated could find guidance, support, and the tools they needed to succeed. She knew how hard it was to navigate a world that was often unwelcoming to those who didn't fit the traditional mold, and she wanted to make sure that no one else had to face those same barriers alone. She reached out to several of her closest colleagues and industry leaders who shared her vision, and together they began to build the foundation for the initiative. They called it Rise Above. It was designed to provide mentorship programs, networking opportunities, and training designed to help people from marginalized communities break through the barriers that had once held them back. The goal was to create a community of empowered individuals who would go on to lead with confidence and create their own opportunities, just as she had done. As the initiative began to take shape and gain traction, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. It was as though everything she had worked for, everything she had experienced, had led her to this moment. She was no longer just a CEO. She was a leader of leaders, a mentor, a guide, and an advocate for those who had been left behind by the traditional systems of power. She had become the very thing that she had once needed when she had been turned away at the door, and she knew that the work she was doing now would have a ripple effect far beyond her own success. Rise Above quickly gained momentum and began to make a real difference in the lives of its participants. As stories of transformation and success began to pour in, she saw firsthand how her efforts were changing the lives of those who had previously been denied access to opportunities they deserved. People were getting hired for positions they had once been told they weren't qualified for. People were stepping into leadership roles with the confidence to lead their teams effectively, and people were starting their own businesses with the knowledge and resources they needed to thrive. She couldn't help but smile as she thought about how far she had come from that night when she had been rejected from the VIP section of the event. She had taken that pain and turned it into something greater than herself. She had not only proven her worth to the world, but had helped others do the same. And as she looked out the window of her office, she knew that this was just the beginning. She was not done yet. There was still so much more work to do, so many more lives to change, and so many more opportunities to create for those who were ready to rise above their circumstances and claim their place at the table. As the months went by, the impact of Rise Above continued to grow and expand. The initiative was becoming a powerful force for change in the business world and beyond. People from all walks of life were signing up, seeking mentorship and guidance from the very network she had helped create. It was clear that the mission she had set in motion was resonating with a growing number of people who had been overlooked or underestimated throughout their careers. The stories of success and transformation continued to pour in, and with each story, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was exactly what she had envisioned when she had taken that leap to create something bigger than herself. She had always believed in the power of potential, and now she was seeing it realized in ways she couldn't have dreamed of. But as the initiative continued to flourish, she began to realize that there were still challenges ahead. The business world was still full of biases and systemic barriers that held people back. No matter how much progress had been made, there were still those who tried to hold on to the old ways of thinking, the old ways of doing things. There were still those who didn't believe in the value of inclusion and diversity, and those who didn't understand that true leadership came from embracing the strengths of all individuals, not just those who fit a narrow mold. And while Rise Above was making a significant impact, she knew that the work was far from done. She spent long nights brainstorming new strategies and initiatives that could help combat these challenges. She knew that in order to create lasting change, the conversation around leadership had to continue to evolve. It wasn't enough to just provide mentorship or create opportunities for a select few. The entire system needed to shift. She started working with other business leaders to build a coalition of like-minded individuals who were committed to challenging the status quo and advocating for real structural change in the workplace. They spoke about the importance of diversity in decision-making. They discussed how different perspectives could strengthen teams and drive innovation. And they shared strategies for how businesses could implement policies that would level the playing field for all employees. At the same time, she never lost sight of her own journey. She continued to remind herself of where she had come from and what had driven her to this point. It wasn't the accolades or the awards, it was the people whose lives had been changed. Because she had made the choice to speak up and push back against the injustices she had faced. She still thought about that night when she was turned away from the VIP section. She still thought about how powerless she had felt, how invisible, and how insignificant it had all seemed. But now, when she looked at her life, her work, and the lives of those she had helped, she realized that rejection had been a blessing in disguise. It had given her the fire she needed to forge a new path, one that would not only allow her to succeed, but would also enable others to find their way. The more she thought about it, the more she understood the importance of giving back. She knew that she had been given a platform, not just for her own success, but to help others find their own success. And so she committed herself to doing even more to create spaces where people could thrive and lead. She knew that the work would be difficult and that there would always be resistance from those who clung to the old ways, but she was determined to keep pushing, to keep challenging, and to keep fighting for the next generation of leaders who would one day stand where she was standing now and do the same. Rise Above was no longer just an initiative. It had become a movement. It had sparked something bigger than a single company or industry. It was a call to action for leaders everywhere to step up and lead in a way that embraced diversity and inclusion at every level. It was a reminder that true leadership was about empowering others, lifting them up, and ensuring that everyone had an equal chance to succeed. She had always known that leadership was about more than just one person. It was about creating a space where everyone's voice could be heard, and now she was seeing the fruits of that vision play out in real time. As the movement continued to grow and evolve, she felt a deep sense of pride, knowing that her journey had made a difference, and yet she knew there was so much more to do. She had come a long way from that woman rejected at the VIP entrance to an internationally recognized leader who was shaping the future of leadership itself. And as she looked toward the future, she was more determined than ever to keep going, to break down even more barriers, to continue challenging the norms, and to ensure that everyone had the opportunity to rise above whatever obstacles stood in their way. As the years passed, the impact of the movement she had started continued to grow and reach new heights. Rise Above was now a global force with chapters in multiple countries and thousands of people who had benefited from its mentorship and resources. She had built something far beyond what she could have ever imagined when she first began her journey to prove herself after that fateful night of rejection. Now, as she stood at the helm of a movement that was changing the face of leadership across industries, she couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led her here, the struggles, the pain, the setbacks, but most importantly, the lessons learned along the way. She thought back to the early days of Rise Above, when it was just an idea in her mind, and a few like-minded individuals who shared her vision. She remembered the long hours spent brainstorming and building the foundation for something that would not only transform her life, but the lives of so many others who had been overlooked or undervalued in their careers. Those days had been challenging, but every step she had taken had led her to this moment, and she knew that the work was not finished, it was only just beginning. One of the greatest joys she experienced now was seeing the people who had once come to rise above for help now stepping up as leaders themselves. Many of them were now mentors for the next generation of talent, offering guidance and support just as she had done for them years ago. It was a beautiful cycle of empowerment and support, and it reminded her that leadership was never about standing alone at the top. It was about lifting others up and helping them succeed so they could lift others in turn. She had created a legacy of transformation, not just in her company or in the lives of those she mentored, but in entire industries. She had shown the world that leadership wasn't about conformity or fitting a certain mold. It was about embracing diversity and creating opportunities for everyone to thrive. It was about creating environments where all voices could be heard and valued, and where talent and hard work were the only things that truly mattered, not where you came from or what you looked like. In those quiet moments when she was alone in her office or walking through the halls of her company, she would often reflect on the challenges she had faced and how far she had come. She thought about how she had gone from being rejected at the door to becoming the CEO of a company and the founder of a global movement. She thought about the people who had doubted her, the people who had tried to put her in a box or hold her back, and how they had only made her stronger. She thought about the feeling of standing on that stage and sharing her story with the world, knowing that she had not just achieved her goals, but had helped others achieve theirs as well. But as proud as she was of all that had been accomplished, she also knew that there was still work to be done. The world was changing, but the fight for true inclusion and equity was far from over. She was more determined than ever to keep pushing for change, to keep challenging the systems and structures that perpetuated inequality, and to keep creating opportunities for people who had been left out of the conversation for too long. The stories of success continued to pour in from people who had benefited from Rise Above, and those stories fueled her passion to continue pushing forward. But she also knew that the journey was never linear. There would always be obstacles and setbacks. There would always be those who tried to resist change. But she had learned to face those challenges head-on with grace and resilience. She knew that true leadership wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about embracing it, learning from it, and using it to fuel your next move. She had learned that success wasn't measured by the number of accolades or awards you received. It was measured by the impact you had on the lives of others, by the way you used your position to create change and open doors. For those who came after you, it was measured by the legacy you left behind and the difference you made in the world. And as she looked at everything she had accomplished, she knew she had created a legacy that would last far beyond her time. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but it had also been one of the most rewarding experiences of her life. She had turned rejection into resilience and created something that would help others rise above the obstacles they faced. And now, as she looked ahead, she knew that there was still so much more to do, so much more to build, and so many more lives to touch. She was just getting started, and she couldn't wait to see where this journey would take her next.